M47, 2.0D 150 horsepower. The diesel engines of the BMW X3 are good, but of course, a lot depends on the condition. You should not trust blatantly filled with oil, i.e. with current gaskets, copies. The basic and old 4-cylinder M47 is truly durable and reliable. It does not have any dampers in the intake, and everything else is standard, EGR, crankshaft damper pulley. The health of the fuel system greatly depends on the quality of the fuel, but injectors and high-pressure fuel pumps can be repaired without any problems. The timing chain lasts up to 500,000 kilometers, but the X3 with the M47 engine was sold only with a manual transmission. This means that a dual-mass flywheel is installed between the engine and transmission. N47, X-Drive 18D N47D 20C 150 horsepower. X-Drive 20D N47D 20C 177 horsepower. The N47 engine, which appeared after restyling, runs much more smoothly and responsively. Today, no one cares about the life of his timing chains, which rarely last up to 250,000 kilometers. Let us remind you that the chains are installed on the flywheel side, in the intake manifold, 1161-8507-239 of the BMW X3 E83. All N47 versions will always have swirl flaps, which cannot be changed separately. Non-original repair kits or simply plugs for removing the dampers come to the rescue. The fuel system of the N47 engine is equipped with Bosch piezo injectors, 1353-7-797-877, 1353-7-800-5428, which in case of failure of the piezo element will have to be replaced with new ones or look for good used ones. New ones are $400 each, Bosch CP4 injection pump and plan chips. He does not tolerate driving on reserve fuel. But in general, everything told about the M47 worries X3 owners much less often than, for example, the vagaries of the transfer case. M57, 3.0D 218 horsepower 204 horsepower M57 TUD 30, 306D2, X-Drive 30D 218 horsepower M57 TUD 30, 306D3, 3.0 SD, X-Drive 35D 286 horsepower M57D 32.2, 306D5. The 6-cylinder turbo or biturbo diesel under the hood of the BMW X3 is always a cast-iron M57 unit with a huge resource. The timing chains on the front also last more than 500,000 kilometers. If we talk about the fuel system, then only the 204 horsepower version has it. These were before restyling. Electromagnetic injectors 1353-7-793-836. Then they were replaced with piezoelectric ones 1353-7-792-721, 1353-7-800-8089. All M57 BMWs have the same intake manifolds, 1161-7-800-585, with swirl flaps, which unfortunately can come off. Most often they are removed and the holes for the axles are plugged. Otherwise, there is nothing special about the M57. Over time, the crankshaft damper pulley, 1123-8500-11371, will need to be replaced. That's $800 for the original or $300 for a decent replacement. Cleaning the intake manifold, replacing gaskets including those under the vacuum pump, that's all that happens over an average of 150,000 kilometers. N46, 2.0i X-Drive 20i N46B 20B 150 horsepower. The first generation X3 was equipped with a 2-liter naturally aspirated N46. Overall, this is a good and strong engine, but it is hot. Leaks oil through numerous gaskets and requires attention in valvetronic and double vanos. There are absolutely all the details about his health. M54, 2.5i M54B 25 192 horsepower. 3.0i M54B 3231 horsepower. Pre-restyling petrol 6s for the BMW X3 are represented by M54 engines. These engines have also proven themselves well. They don't just break down. The cylinders don't lift up, and they don't make any crunching noises with either the camshafts or the crankshaft. With all this, with high mileage, it is necessary to eliminate oil leaks on all gaskets. Prepare to replace phase shifters and the DISA damper. Be sure to maintain the crankcase ventilation valves in good condition and combat oil waste by replacing valve stem seals. N52, X-Drive 25i N52B 25 218 horsepower. 3.0C, X-Drive 30i N52B 30 272 horsepower. After restyling, the role of the most powerful gasoline engine was given to the N52 engine, an inline naturally aspirated 6. There are options with a volume of 2.5 and 3.0 liters. Opinions about these motors are very different. The point is that if you don't pay proper attention to it, everything will be bad and expensive. What does it mean to pay attention? After a run of 150,000 kilometers, this engine begins to act up. All rubber gaskets will begin to leak oil. Oil will cover the oil filter cup, valvetronic gasket, and intake manifold gaskets. Something will burst somewhere in the intake tract, and air leaks will appear. Decent dampers will require attention and repair or replacement. Over time, the valve seals will begin to leak oil, and the oil burn will begin to progress. In general, the oil consumption of the N52 engine is an obsessive topic. Let's start with the fact that the 2.5-liter version 8 oil straight from the factory. Its oily appetite can only be curbed by replacing old piston rings with new ones. First of all, the problem is in unsuccessful oil scraper rings. Fans of the N52 engine, any version, changes oil every 5 to 7,000 kilometers, which protects it from stuck piston rings and other problems, and often at such intervals it is necessary to add a liter of oil. And the own filling volume of this engine is 6.5 liters. If you skimp on oil and simply don't monitor its level between changes, then the N52 can easily gobble up most of the oil supply. Other problems will appear with the timing chain, with Vanos clutches, with Valvetronic, the exhaust camshaft journals and its supports may wear out, which is why this camshaft will begin to knock in the increased gap. In general, it is impossible to save on maintenance of the N52 engine. It is simply impossible. At the heart of the all-wheel drive transmission is the ATC 400 transfer case, which automatically flexibly connects the front axle. The front axle is disengaged using a clever servo drive, which controls the closure of the clutch pack. Typically, problems in this transfer case begin with the fact that the servo drive, 27,102,449,709, ceases to see the position of the electric motor shaft. All-wheel drive fault indicators light up on the instrument panel. The degree of all-wheel drive connection is not adjustable. The car can remain either rear-wheel drive or partially all-wheel drive. In this case, you can remove the servo drive from the transfer case, completely disassemble it and clean the insides of coal dust and metal shavings. These where products blind the Hall sensor. Plus, you need to evaluate the condition of the plastic gear driven by the worm of the electric motor. The teeth are ground down halfway around its circumference, so it can be turned over so that the untouched teeth engage with the worm. Non-original repair kits are also sold for the servo drive. If the servo drive is alive, but there are problems in the transfer case, then all of them are only in the mechanical part. They can be associated with both chain stretching and wear of the oil pump, shaft bearing, bell and everything else. Many shops offer restoration of ATC 400 transfer cases to better than new condition. To delay the onset of mechanical wear of the transfer case, you need to change the oil in it. The original 8322-2409-710 ETF1 costs about $60 per liter. There are cheaper analogs. With huge mileage, the transfer case cushion gets tired and bursts. The silent block, 22,316,773,125, in the bracket on which it is suspended. The propeller shafts of the BMW X3 do not come off, but with long runs, approximately 300,000 kilometers, play appears in the crosspieces, and the outboard bearing gets tired, 26-12-7-521-855. Cartons need to be sent for restoration with replacement of worn parts and balancing. Today there are many such workshops. On the pre-restyling X3 E83, the front driveshaft is not protected from dirt, but on the restyled ones there is a shield. Therefore its crosspieces, especially the rear ones, last longer. The elastic coupling 26-11-7-572-664 of rear cardan is also not eternal. It needs to be changed when deep cracks appear. The original one costs over $200, and there are many offers for substitutes. With mileage exceeding 250,000 kilometers, oil may leak from the front and rear gearboxes along the seals. We do not advise you to ignore these leaks, and even more so, we do not advise you to forget about checking the level, or better yet, about changing the oil in the gearboxes. All you need is 2 liters of regular 75 watts -90 gear oil. BMWs are equipped with ride height sensors 37, 14, 6, 784, 697 to adjust the headlight beam angle. There are regular problems with these sensors if the car is constantly driven on wet, muddy roads. The point is that moisture gets into the sensor connector or penetrates the housing along the shaft from the rod side. Both original sensors and replacements are poorly sealed. In general, You needed to use grease compounds, lubricants, provide ride height sensors with literally water repellent properties. In addition, due to corrosion, sensor rods can come off the shaft and simply spin on it. The BMW X3 is often found with manual transmissions. In general, there are no questions about the mechanics. But you need to know that in the case of a manual transmission, the flywheel will be dual mass. This is an expensive part, but in this case it lasts more than 300,000 kilometers. The first generation BMW X3 was equipped with automatic transmissions from ZF and GM. The automatic was not available in conjunction with the M47 diesel. GM 5L40 E5 speed automatic transmission. The 5-speed automatic on this crossover is always the GM 5L40 E automatic. GM 6L45 or 6-speed automatic transmission. After restyling, a 6-speed GM 6L45 or transmission was installed in tandem with the gasoline 6s. ZF 6HP19/6HP26. 6th Street. The ZF 6 horsepower series automatic transmission appeared on the pre-restyling X3 from the end of 05 with a 218 horsepower 3-liter turbo diesel. It is traditionally believed that GM transmissions are more finicky and fragile than German ZF ones. However, in practice, both are capable of traveling 400,000 kilometers before overhaul. It all really depends on the use and driving style. All transmissions need to change ATF every 60,000 kilometers. American transmissions are cheaper to maintain because they have a separate filter. But for ZF with a plastic pan, such versions have been available since September 2007. The filter is built into the pan. This part is much more expensive, about $150. 2415 to 333 903. Yes, before the announced date there are 6 horsepower automatic transmissions with a light alloy pan. They have a separate filter. 2415 to 333 899. GM transmission filters are much cheaper. The weak point in GM units, especially the 6-speed, is the valve body. ZF has rubber seals inside above the valve body, which can ruin your mood one fine frosty morning. Plus, you need to promptly eliminate oil leaks in the pan and at the electrical wiring entry point, and the fact that the transmissions are getting ready to be repaired is indicated by kicks and hard gear shifts. You shouldn't delay this, especially if the jerky operation persists after changing the oil and filter. None of the BMW engines, especially gasoline ones, tolerate working with dirty radiators. They need to be cleaned externally and washed every 50,000 kilometers. With long-term exposure to reagents, dampness and dirt, the main radiator and the air conditioner condenser may burst or swell. A new original radiator, 17,113,400,013, costs about $300. There are cheaper analogs. It is worth changing the expansion tank cap, 17,13,7,639,023, every 2 years so that the pressure in the cooling system does not go off scale. You need to install a high-quality thermostat. In a BMW X3 with any gasoline engine, the expansion tank bursts at 200,000 kilometers, 17,117,573,781. The original costs about $80 if there are many substitutes. It is worth changing it preventively before the summer season, and at the same time flushing the entire cooling system. The air conditioning radiator in BMW is a standard problem. It does not work on most cars, because it does not cause any visible errors. It stops working due to oxidation of the contacts, which can sometimes be cured by resoldering. The radiator fan on these machines stops working without any warning. Its failure can be diagnosed using a proprietary scanner or simply by observing it, whether it spins or not. The electronic control board is located in the fan motor and often suffers from moisture and subsequent corrosion. There are cases of burst capacitors and winding breaks. As a rule, the fan electronics become beyond repair. You have to replace the fan assembly with a new one. The prices are steep, about $800 for the original, $17,113,401,056. Substitutes are only 2 times cheaper. The fan may also hum, but here you can get by replacing the bearing. But this must be done carefully, because you can finish off the electronics. Under the hood, diesel BMW Zs have a continuous inline reheater, 6412-9-145-439. It is built into the cooling system pipes. Over time it fails absolutely silently. The engine will only slowly heat up, and at idle the speed will float. You can simply turn off the chip, then the revolutions will stop floating. You can replace it with a used one, and a new one costs under $900. There, near the glass on the driver's side, an additional pump is installed on diesel Zs. It is electric and serves for uniform circulation of antifreeze through the stove. This pump fails without visible errors. Its malfunction is visible only during computer diagnostics. You can revive the pump. You need to change the carbon brushes of its electric motor. When driving over 250,000 kilometers, it is worth inspecting the engine support cushions more often, especially for versions with 6-cylinder engines. It happens that if the driver turns the steering wheel to a large angle and begins to accelerate with the pedal to the floor, jerks and vibrations will appear. Often they appear precisely because of worn-out engine mounts. Such episodes of operation may result in the left front axle shaft falling out of the splines. The suspension of the first-generation BMW X3 is pleasantly tenacious. At the front there are McPherson struts, traditional for BMW of those years, with a divided lower control arm. By the way, the levers in the original are steel, not light alloy. The rear silent block, 3112-124-622, wears out the fastest, but is sold separately for $30. This is the price for the original, which will run at least 100,000 kilometers. The front silent block, 3112-0307-882, is much more expensive, about $150 for the original. The front wheel bearings 3123-450-600 are replaced separately from the hubs, but are still very expensive in the original, $200 each. Substitutes, from $30. On the rear axle shafts, the combs for the ABS sensors swell over time and the sensors themselves grind down. We have to remove the rear axle shafts and install a new comb from a non-original repair kit. The rear suspension has 3 levers. All silent blocks are sold separately and can be repressed without any problems. Original trailing arm and axle bushings cost $30. In general, they and the rest of the rear suspension silent blocks need to be closely monitored and, if possible, replaced as a whole set, because often a spot replacement ends in nothing. The wheels will continue to look housey even after adjustment. It's a shame to complain about the body of the BMW X3, but there are nuances. For example, on pre-restyling cars, the coating of the roof rails installed on the roof swells and crumbles. Something similar happens with the coating on the legs of mirrors. The black coating falls off. If the roof rails can be simply painted using the technology, some even manage to do this without removing the roof rails from the roof, then the mirror brackets will have to be sandblasted. Aluminum brackets corrode in their own way and require special preparation for painting. On the restyled X3 E83, the roof rail coating is of higher quality and more durable, but the varnish covering the sill trims peels off. These are standard problems associated with the quality of paintwork. With age, problems with corrosion begin, which depends mainly on the degree of exposure to reagents. But here everything is standard. Beetles can peek out from under the plastic lining of the wheel arches. A lot of sand and dirt gets packed in there, and together they wipe the paintwork. It is worth keeping an eye on the bottom edges of the doors. The trunk door here consists of 1 leaf. The trunk opening usually does not suffer from corrosion. In general, corrosion begins from the bottom, and in search of it, it's worth looking behind the fuel tank. The front windows of the X3 quickly become cloudy on the outside and become chipped, but polishing and armored film help here. It's worse if the glasses are covered with a web of cracks. True, the cracks are shallow and do not let water through. The headlights just look very tired. The trunk door has a built-in bar that contains the license plate lights and the lock release button. Water gets into this bar, causing the simple electronic board to corrode. As a result, the lampshades go out. Replacing the lamps does not help. What's even worse is that the trunk button will trigger falsely or won't unlock the lock at all. A new original strip, 51,133,403,611, costs about $150. There are several non-original solutions that are 2 to 3 times cheaper. You can also disassemble the poorly functioning strip and restore the corroding soldering. Speaking of electronics, let's name a couple more components that are not particularly capable of surviving 15 to 20 years without replacement. These are parking sensors and windshield washer pumps. True, these are not the most expensive parts to replace. Half of the LEDs in the central brake light also stop shining over time, but they do not burn out, but the tracks that power them are cut off. A new brake light, 63,213,440,408, and the trunk door visor will cost $250. There are no replacements. You can find a used brake light. But there is a cheaper solution: opening the body of the central stop, searching for a brake and soldering the tracks. Nothing complicated, but the body of this flashlight will have to be cut from the back, and then properly glued and sealed. With age, the rear windshield wiper also dies. Moisture can get into its mechanism with control electronics, which will damage the electronic board. Plus, if you don't use it, the wiper shaft becomes sour, but this can be sorted out by cleaning. And if the wiper blade freezes tightly to the glass in winter, Then when turned on, it cuts off the teeth in the gearbox. The new windshield wiper mechanism, 67-63-6-917-907, is very expensive, about $600. There are many substitutes for $100, $300 because part in demand. Over time, the original windshield wiper arm begins to look sloppy. It can be replaced with a leash from the second generation X3 E83, $70 for the original, $61,627,206,357, plus cap $61,627,161,030, and you need to install a frameless one, $397,008,050, to it. You can also buy such a leash from non-original brands. There are a lot of offers for them. In exterior mirrors, the cables corrode due to moisture, and the motors and electronic board may fail. The mirror adjustment will stop working, and in versions with electric folding this function will not work. If there is seat memory, there may be another manifestation of the malfunction. The mirrors may move to their extreme positions when the central locking is opened. In any case, you will have to disassemble the mirrors and eliminate the consequences of moisture. A new mirror adjustment unit, $67,138,362,421, costs about $110, and if the car has seat memory, then $300, $67,136,941,545. The trapezium of the front windshield wipers of the BMW X3 does not stand the test of water and time. Its hinge joints corrode and the bushings wear out, especially on the passenger side. Nobody buys a new original trapeze, 61-61-705-1669, for $900. Used ear trapezoids with a motor and gearbox cost about $100. In addition, new non-original trapezoids complete with a gear motor cost an average of $170. In general, to eliminate play in the rods of the trapezoid levers, you can machine brass bushings. They are put on both shafts instead of the standard plastic bushings. If the front wipers stop working altogether, then you will have to change the entire gear motor because the electronics in the old one burned out. Like other BMWs from the 2000s, the first generation X3 can allow rainwater to spill onto the floor and soak the carpet. The peeling waterproofing of the doors is to blame for this. It is because of this that water gets under the door cards and into the interior, rather than remaining in the internal cavity to pour out through the drains. In general, the waterproofing of the doors needs to be re-glued. If water collects in the side niches of the trunk, then you need to check whether the valves that are located there fit well to the body. These are the so-called ventilation grills. When the seal around their perimeter dries out, they begin to let in water, which is lifted by the wheels from the road. On cars with a panoramic roof, you need to inspect its rear drains. If the pipes behind the headliner have come off, then water will also get into the trunk niches. Don't forget about the tube to the rear windshield wiper. It can become disconnected from the rear in the ceiling, and water or washer fluid will flow into the trunk from above. And if the liquid in the tube freezes, it will rupture the tube. After this, the liquid will not flow to the rear washer, but under the carpet on the right side of the cabin. Let's get back to the optional panoramic roof. It's not a gift. The guides in the rear section broke and jammed on 3 to 5-year-old cars. The door locks, especially the rear ones, on the BMW X3 are rather weak. They no longer hold the doors in intermediate positions. They should be replaced with new ones.